wow, we're starting to fix something in Kingpin in that moment. And I don't know if like I'm kind of scared to see what happens where he feels like he's healing. Because I don't know. I
Yeah,
want to villainize him, you know?
yes, that was perfect.
Welcome back to the Breakroom. I'm Erik Voss, and today we are bringing you an interview with the head writer of Marvel's Echo, Marion Dayre. This conversation will have a lot of spoilers, so this is your warning in case you haven't watched Echo yet. Mary and I had a great conversation about this show. We talked about the early days of crafting the series and the discussions around incorporating Echo's ancestors and her powers. And be sure to stick around in this video to find out about Marion's thoughts about Maya's fight with Kingpin in the finale, as well as how Daredevil almost didn't make it in the series. And this interview addresses a question: did Echo heal Kingpin? Has his cold-blooded heart been warmed? Let's find out. Thank you so much, Marion, for taking some time to chat with us. And all of us here at New Rockstars in the Break Room really loved Echo, and we're just excited to talk with you about it more in depth, about the project, your history with it, your history as a writer as well. Because did a bit of digging into your past, and I was like, oh, so many of these like things that like I've watched and loved, like you were part of.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I couldn't
Yeah.
think of anything more fun or rewarding to do with my time than talk to other people who are passionate and like into the arts at the same level. It's a dream.
Yeah.
This is a dream. So thank you.
Well, let's talk about how this project came to be. Is this something Marvel came to you with? Is this something that you pitched on? How did you come to be attached to Echo?
Yeah, the project was existing before me, and I don't know what the conversations were on the Marvel side, but I'm really grateful for them, for those conversations, because whatever they were, they led them to reach out to me and bring me in and start talking about this character and what the possibilities for her could be, and what it looked like to work on it with a really, really talented group of writers who had the same priorities about the story. So it was existing when I came in, and we hit the ground running.
Yeah. I was looking at your background, and I saw that you once had an internship with the late great Laura Ziskin, who produced a number of great films, but was involved with the early Spider-Man films, and that you had worked on Spider-Man 3. And I'm just curious, as someone who was there when that was being made, how, in your view, has Marvel productions changed? Like Marvel filmmaking, Marvel television production, how has the world changed?
Oh, wow. It's changed a lot since I interned for Laura in 2009, and I was pretty specific. I moved out from Nebraska and really didn't know what I was doing, thankfully, or I might not have tried all the things that I tried. So sometimes it's good to be naive when you set out, but I really targeted certain people that I hoped I could be around, and Laura was on a very short list because she's just so forward thinking, and she was doing things at the time that nobody else, that no other females, I think, were trying to do. And so I got to get in on when she was working on Spider-Man 3 and the Stand Up to Cancer campaign. And I thought those were both such meaningful projects to me, and to, as somebody who loved Marvel films growing up. And the TV, it was just so exciting to me because I got into TV, and then to see the way that Marvel television and the series started taking off was so exciting to me, because I just felt like there were a lot of stories that fit better in that extended format, where you could really explore character movements in a way that like it didn't allow us to do in that 90-minute format.
One thing that I noticed while I was watching Echo is it had this, it's a show that's living in multiple worlds, both for the character and in terms of the tone and the genre and the setting. And the fact that you have Maya Lopez returning from the city, from the life of the crime, going out west to her home community of Oklahoma, I was reminded of stories like another show you worked on, Better Call Saul, and the character of Mike, and how he he leaves this like world of police corruption. And I saw that you worked on Better Call Saul, and that you wrote like the season 4 episode Talk that kind of opens with like Mike with his son. What like lessons did you learn from Better Call Saul that you were, did you find yourself applying anything from that experience to what you did on Echo?
Yeah, endless. That's a really good question too, because there was Better Call Saul has a pre-existing world, a world that we built off from. Marvel certainly bigger and more, the scope is bigger of the different properties to incorporate there. But just like Better Call Saul and the characters of Jimmy, Mike, Gus, anybody that you saw in Breaking Bad, with some of these established characters, we had Maya, Kingpin, Daredevil, even a glimpse of Hawkeye. We really took each character into consideration on their own terms. Every character thinks they're the main character of the story. I'm not the main character in my sister's story. She is. So, we
Right.
looked at these characters individually, said, where do they come from? Where did they get in trouble in their lives? Like, what relationships are really important to them outside of the main characters we think would be important, but what else is going on for them? And we started to dissect them individually. We spent a lot of time talking about character in Better Call Saul too, and that enables you to, when you're scene building and when we're breaking episodes, to say, like, let's stand with Maya where she is, think about where she's been, thinking about the pain or the joy that she's had in her past that would shape the decision that she's about to make, and really honor that next right indicated action.
Yeah, Maya's whole story just seems to be so governed, as we discover through the course of the series, by her ancestry, by her history. And I really just love how you guys wove the word echo into her story, her identity, and even down to the first scene, which I feel like was such a ballsy move for a Marvel title, to open with this origin story of Chafa emerging from under the earth. I would love to hear how that decision came to be. Was this always the opening scene? Did you have any challenges with making this the opening scene?
We didn't have any challenges as far as convincing Marvel that it was the right thing to do once we knew it. Like, once we all knew what the story, I'm getting goosebumps, because like once you know what the story is, it presents itself just like,
oh sure,
just like a person who knows who they are and is really excited about that. And it's just something that everybody fully embraced once we knew. I don't believe, and again, this is a while ago now that we first started talking about the scene, but we did talk about different potential Choctaw legend and how Maya's ancestors were going to weave into her story in the present day, and even we talked about her descendants and what futures would look like. Again, there was a lot of discussion that you didn't get to see on screen, that didn't make it to the script, but they all informed where she was going. But we did have those four descendant storyline, four ancestor storylines pretty early on, and we had variations of, are we going to play one straight through? Are we going to weave it throughout the episode? How much weave are we going to have? So there were several structures at play before we started to realize that there was going to be an ancestor present in each episode, and that they were going to build together and eventually join later in the season.
Yeah, it did feel like, you're saying every character is the hero of their own story. That's absolutely what I felt while watching this show, that each of these women who were links in the chain, each could be superheroes in their own right. Like, I loved how in episode 3, it opens with the Light Horseman newsreel. It reminded me of like the Hooded Justice thing in HBO's Watchmen, which is, it's similar in that regard, but it like kind of reframes history in this cool way to empower the present generation. Did you ever have an idea to maybe open the series just with that? Because that could have been another opening series.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that we progressed. Chafa was the first, so we felt like she needed to be the first person early on, and it felt like we found the right progression of introducing the ancestors. And we do have an insanely talented group of Indigenous writers in the room, represented across 5 different tribes. So they all brought a wealth of ideas, of legend, of different things that we might be able to work into Maya's lineage. And so it was really, I mean, that was one of my favorite parts, was talking through each one of those set pieces and how we might show them. Is it black and white? Is it the kind of surreal heightened color that you saw in Chafa's storyline? What does everything look like? How does it make the audience feel visually? And they were all discussions that we had while we were shaping these characters.
I imagine there's got to be, all kind of interesting turns working on a Marvel title can take when it comes to like a multi-episodic story that you're breaking. Did the episode structure evolve over the course of production or in post-production? Like, were there storylines that you had to kind of condense or that you were able to expand upon?
Yes, absolutely, both. I wish we could issue an extended cut where you could see everything, and there were scenes along the way, as there are on any project. There were scenes that, as we got closer to prep, we realized like we need to trim or condense this storyline. So even before things were shot, we extended and condensed storylines. We played several ways that the Kingpin's character could be developed, a little more, a little less here. We had a character early on that ended up not making it through to the story. Daredevil wasn't part of Maya's story from the very beginning. That was something we knew. We were able to get him in later on. So it was all shifting and changing. Not all, but there were a lot of those pieces shifting and changing as we went along, and it was so fun again to look at Kingpin, to look at Daredevil as if they're the main characters in their own story, as if they don't think that they're good guys or bad guys. They just do what they do. We watched Daredevil again. We watched all the Daredevil things that we could again, and then we even watched a Kingpin supercut from the Daredevil show. So just the Kingpin scenes, and looking at Daredevil from Kingpin's point of view was especially helpful when we were talking about the Kingpin Maya sort of father daughter or uncle niece relationship that you saw come out in the episodes of Echo.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I totally felt that, especially with Wilson Fisk. In like, he definitely feels like he's the good guy, and that just paints him in a different light because we are seeing him do problematic, wrong things, but like it's coming from, and a lot of that is in D'Onofrio's performance, right? Like he plays it with a sense of empathy that you just like, you want to root for him despite how horrible he is. I thought it was interesting how like he goes to these lengths to develop this technology of this AR ASL interpretation, these floating arms. How did that technology come about? Like, because I look at it as like, oh, this is like a bit of hypocrisy from him. This is a guy who like has learned to learn Mandarin so he can talk to business contacts, but like he can't take the time to learn ASL. Instead, he takes this shortcut. Like, what was the origin of this technology, and how do you see that as like a reflection of Wilson Fisk as a person?
Yeah. And speaking of the representation in the room, we had two great deaf writers in our room, two Josh and Shoshana, and they're just such an invaluable part of the process. I think the technology, the idea for technology came in pretty early. We didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, but we knew that Fisk needed something that he could use to have conversations with Maya, that he hadn't learned ASL. And then to go back to your questions of, good guys or bad guys, I think everybody in this story is a renegade in their own right. I think Maya is. I think her ancestors are. They all, in some way, deserted the communities that they were part of, even in the Light Horseman storyline. She was walking away from the female representation, the female lifestyle she was supposed to live so that she could do what she wanted to do. So in that way, I think we had pretty fair. We met people where they were, and for Fisk, one of the questions that kept coming up, and to go back to your question of things that we talked about in the Better Call Saul days, were what does it look like when somebody does the wrong things for the right reasons, or what happens if what Fisk needs the most is connection, and what's fueling him the most is trauma from his childhood and anger and this sense of like vengeance. But what happens when the vengeance that you need is on yourself? Like, what does that look like? And so I think that we did come to the right choice for that character and that relationship, and it is something that we hope that the audience would talk about. Like, why is he using this? Why is he using it? Why isn't he taking the time to learn?
Yeah, it's interesting because the show is so grounded in its world. It doesn't have what you see in some of these other shows where it's like, you know, like the CGI craziness that can sometimes even distract from the story. This was like the one little thing that felt like, oh, this is like a sci-fi type thing, and it was such a reflection of like, God, you took all this time. There's no way that like the engineers that you paid to build this like is cheaper than just taking some ASL classes, dude. Like, connect with this daughter figure that you have. I just loved it as like, oh, this is exactly what Kingpin would do, you know?
Yeah, and he's got like technology companies, doesn't he? So like,
Yeah.
also he's developing new products that he hopes can be
Yeah.
all over the world. So maybe there's like a Fisk line of technology that he's interested in, you know?
He'd rather have his goons hold her down and put a contact in her eye so that she would meet him where he is. Yeah, I loved that. I was like, yeah, this is Kingpin. He'd totally do this. It also felt like an MCU Kingpin as well, because we didn't always get to see that aspect of Kingpin in the Netflix shows, but it felt like, ooh, yeah, like I was like, I'm ready for this kind of, you know, treacherous Kingpin. And
Yeah.
I got, yeah, but when she uses her powers, and let's talk about her powers in a second, but do you feel like when she holds her hands to his head, are we supposed to feel like she is healing something in him in that moment?
What did you feel?
I felt that she was. I felt that, like, you know, that rabbit in a snowstorm component to Kingpin is so important to him from the Netflix show, where he's looking at the wall as his father's abusing his mom, and like, for Echo to go back in his bedroom with him, it felt like, wow, we're starting to fix something in Kingpin in that moment. And I don't know if, like, I'm kind of scared to see what happens where he feels like he's healing, because I don't know. I want to villainize him, you know?
Yes, that was perfect. I mean, I wasn't leading you into an answer, but I feel like that is, you know, that's the hope, is that people will internalize it just the way that you did and ask themselves the same kind of questions. Is like, Maya's mother certainly had the capability to heal, and so that healing ability is something that Maya now has access to, now that she's connected to her roots. But what happens when, you know, healing someone else, maybe she's partially, since her and Kingpin were so entangled when she was younger, perhaps she's healing herself, allowing herself to move past this obligation she feels to get some kind of a resolution for vengeance for her dad's death, you know. And if she's able to do that, maybe she can move past, and Kingpin no longer has the ability to control her via her rage. So if she's able to do that, then what does that mean for him? Those are questions that we hoped we could set up for people, is like, who is Kingpin without those feelings? I don't know.
Yeah, this was obviously a big change to what comics readers might know about Echo's power set. And, you know, I always like tell people, like, before you react to things, just read the comics that these characters are based on, because the character of Echo is a relatively recent addition to the Marvel Comics lore. And, you know, her powers in the comics is something akin to Taskmaster. You know, she can mirror specific attacks. In this show, you guys took it back to like her ancestral roots, and you updated it to have this something akin to healing, but something that she shares with the other women in her family. And how did the conversation about these new powers start?
Yeah, from the very beginning, it was really important to us that her background and her tribal identity would have a consistent and a robust portrayal over the course of the series, and for her story, for the length of her story from beginning to end. And that was one thing that we reconsidered from the publication history. So we ultimately decided to redefine it for the series, and thought that it worked better for the story that we're trying to tell. And it gave us the, you know, that again, consistent and robust portrayal of all sides of her.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think, like, it was interesting to see it evolve throughout the start of the show. Like, we see that power in the opening image, you know, of Chafa before she rises. And I thought that was just so interesting visually to see it come about. So executive producer Brad Winderbaum is quoted as saying, Marvel Spotlight is something that we came up with on post-production on Echo. And this is going to be Marvel's way of doing more standalone, potentially like grittier or just more specific to characters and their world's stories. Now, I wanted to ask, if you had the Spotlight name before getting into the writing process, do you think that might have changed your approach in any way? Or did just the Spotlight idea come as a result organically of what you guys were doing?
That I would love to find the answer to that. I mean, it certainly wouldn't have changed the approach that we took or how we were thinking about the character. I'm thrilled that we were able to contribute something that helped spark to the idea that maybe more like this could follow. And for us, we just felt like, again, we need to meet this character where she is and tell the story that she needs to tell. And we felt like that was a different, maybe stakes on a different scope than what you're used to seeing in other Marvel shows. We felt like she does have a story where she's in Oklahoma. She's not in New York, like many of the rest of it. So she is removed that way. And it's awesome that we were able to find a way to have people come in and watch Maya's story without knowing much. That was one of the things that excited me the most about the character, is like how can we draw in people who don't know her or don't know anything about her and don't know what pre-exists in the Marvel universe. And we knew early on, like, this is probably not going to be a show like some of the other Marvel shows that have come recently before. It will feel different, look different.
Just kind of like a technical question from like a screenwriting perspective, writing a dialogue that is so specific to to characters who are communicating through ASL, does it change the way you like shape that dialogue on the page? Do you write any other notes to kind of shape like they emote their signing a specific way, or the characters who maybe aren't like deaf but are responding through using ASL, like do you just like write differently when characters are writing that or communicating that way?
Yeah, we talked about dialogue the same that we talk about dialogue on the page. It looks a little bit different. We would either use dual dialogue columns, or we would markate that in italics. And we did consider the fact that different characters had a different level of ability to sign. And so we kept that honest too. You'll see some Plains Indian Sign Language in there, PISL, in addition to ASL. Josh and Shoshana and Doug Ridloff, who was in production, took many looks at the script, and of course were involved in all of the conversations and story building along the way, so that we could have a really legit portrayal. We had conversations with, about the way that it looks on screen too. Like, we want to be on them when they're signing. We want to see what they're doing. We want to see what they're saying. So we don't want to frame it in a way that excludes their dialogue. Yeah,
that's so interesting, because like that it completely changes the way the scene is shot and the way the scene is blocked, because you need to be able to see the character. You can't do like over the shoulder shots as easily. And so it forces us to just like sit with characters a bit longer, and just to like, I feel like the shot length was longer while I was watching the show, as opposed to just like quick cutting in dialogue scenes. And it allowed me to like, I don't know, empathize with the character and get to know the character and how they're feeling. And I just noticed different things about actors' performances that I wouldn't have noticed otherwise if characters weren't signing.
Yeah. It was important to not hurry. Don't hurry. Like let's stay. Plus, all these scenes deserve to have the emotional weight that they're carrying. So all for the better. And I just think that Sydney and Kat and Kira and everybody, again, were so. It was so amazing to have such lockstep with the priorities for the characters and the story that we were trying to tell.
You had mentioned that like initially Daredevil wasn't part of it, but at some point things just shifted around and you had access to him, which, based off of like interviews with writers who are working on a lot of these titles, it kind of just sounds like, hey, just, the stars aligned and then now we could get this cameo in it. You're part of this MCU. If you could have free reign to utilize any MCU character in this show, are there any other Marvel characters out there that you would love to just have walk into a scene?
Oh man, so many. I just think it would change the story entirely. Of course, then the urge for all of us is like, if you can get a powerhouse to come into the story, you want to go full throttle if you can and use them to the extent that you can. But when we looked at it, we had Daredevil the perfect right amount. So left to my own devices, I'd pull everybody. Like, why do if Echo kept her same power too? I was like, we have to get Taskmaster in at some point, but I don't know how many. But it doesn't work. I don't know how many dozens and dozens of other MCU characters and that we talked about and that we would have loved to use. And we looked at a lot of characters that haven't had screen time much or at all
Mhm.
to see if there were other folks that came in. But ultimately, that was just, it didn't work in the amount of story that we had to tell, the amount of real estate that we had. So maybe
Yeah.
one day.
I think it's for the best. I mean, you it must be tempting to be part of the MCU sandbox and have like dozens and dozens of insane characters that have been brought to life. But like, I think that could be too much sometimes to have too many cameos, and then it becomes too much about them. And I think having her fight with Matt Murdock, and then just like the little details that you guys were able to savor of just like the way that she uses her leg to fight him, and there's like a delay in there, and it just looks so sick. Like, it's just it tells us so much about how she works as a fighter and how she has adapted to the world. I thought that was so
Yeah,
cool.
the choreography is amazing. And the way that Sydney shot that scene was just like chef's kiss, and that wonder. It was just like she went in. Maya goes into that scene a fledgling and comes out fully formed, and she's a different person, a different kind of
Mhm.
fighter on the other side of that encounter. And it just like, oof, it sings.
Is there something that you wish people asked you more about this show that you think people in the world, or people who like follow us on YouTube, should know about Echo that they might not?
That's a really, really good question. I don't have an answer for that off the top of my head. I mean, I love the conversations that the story is creating, and even people who I don't go too deep into reviews because it's harmful for
Yeah.
creative output to worry too much. But I do see that it's like there are some people who are saying it's paced a certain way that they don't respond to, or maybe that not certain characters got screen time. I see a lot of people talking about how grounded it is, and I want to ask questions too. I want to say, like, what does grounded mean to you?
Hmm.
What does the right pace balance look like for you? And I love that it's so subjective, but I just think a lot of, as we call it, water cooler conversation is coming out of this show, not just about Kingpin and Daredevil, but very, very much conversation about Maya. I just think it's beyond exciting to have a character like this who's in the MCU.
I think that's great, and good on you for not reading the reviews. I can tell you, as someone who like has written tweets like this before and has like struggled to like find what words to say, and I have to like post something right now about it. Like, often people will just say things like pacing and grounded, and if you were to ask them, they would have no response. They would have no idea. They're like, oh, because it's never been easier to just have a job as someone who just says things about Marvel movies online, or just to be someone who just gets
Yeah,
access.
I
Like,
mean,
it's
and
just
you
like
can always
everyone does.
Yeah, and you can find a community that way, right? And we're all looking for
Yeah.
community. So community, and I think, look, it's flattering if someone watches my show and doesn't like it. It's flattering if they watch it and do like it. I mean, I think the thing that feels the saddest to me is if someone watches and they're like, I don't care, I don't remember it, and I haven't heard that come out of it yet. So I if people are caring one way or another, great. And now that the WGA was able to secure data transparency and success-based residuals, even if people watched it and don't like it, we finally get residual payments based on views. So cool. I'm happy you watched it.
Which, congrats. And I'm seeing some reports. It's always hard to know with streamers what exactly like the numbers are, but it sounds like now you have a way to get that transparency, and it sounds like this show's been successful. Like, a lot of people have been finding it on Disney Plus and Hulu, and they're watching it.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing.
Well, great, Marion. This has been so great. I've been so amazed to learn all this stuff about the show, and I'm so grateful that you've made this time to chat with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
What a wonderful conversation. Thank you again so much to Marion Dayre for sitting down with us. Be sure to follow all 3 channels in the New Rockstars network. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.